first big design topic, and we'll see how many more people show up. And this is something I've been thinking about over the last few days. And so I'm going to be calling tofu games. And a long time ago, I used to call these titles one-trick ponies. This is when I play a game that has just one core gameplay loop that doesn't do anything else with it. And it's just about repeating that same kind of style again and again and again until either the person beats the game or they just get sick and tired of playing it. On the Grabback stream the other night, I played N++, which could be an example of this, Crimson Land, Tesla vs. Lovecraft, even stuff like Roundabout would be examples of this, and a lot of puzzle games like Tetris, many of the Match 3 titles, etc., etc. But the reason why I call it kind of a tofu game is that tofu is something that it goes with everything, but it's not something you can really enjoy for too long just by itself plain. I wouldn't know. I am a card-carrying member of the Carnivore Club and have my love of cheeseburgers there. But even with that said, though, you get tired of just repeating the same thing again and again. No matter how great it may be, it just starts to wear on you. And this is one of the differences I find between a game like N++ versus something like Super Meat Boy. Both titles are platformers. They're both very precision and physics-based. But I have beaten Super Meat Boy 100%, and I have yet to come close to beating N++, despite the difficulty and challenge of playing it. And part of the reason is that N++ kind of goes through all of its tricks relatively early in the game's lifespan. Once you understand how the physics work and how to build and maintain momentum, then you're just really repeating those same steps with just slight variations based on what the environment lays out and what enemies. There's not even too many enemy types. You have the lasers, rockets, ghosts, chasers, and I think there's two others who I forget their names. But there's at least like 200 to 300 levels in that game, not counting the workshop levels. And my voice is starting to go. 1 second. We'll see how long my voice can last today. But it's one of those big differences where I think it's one of those things that has really shown the creativity of the Mario Maker and the Kaizo scene that we've seen grow over the last few years. I've watched speedrunners play various Kaizo hacks of Super Mario World. I was just watching a Graham Pooh Bear play Invictus, and again, what makes these hacks very interesting is that they're all built on the basic foundation of Super Mario World's gameplay. There's also SMB3, and I'm sure there's other ones as well. But while Mario is still performing much in the same way within each hack, how they change it is based on what kind of challenges and the technicality that's required to play this. And for anyone who hasn't watched, definitely check out people who've played Kaizo games like Super Kaizo World, Super Pangea World. There's even a there's Graham Pooh World. There's a Kaizo game named after the speedrunner, and there's many, many more. I mean, there's an entire community at this point that's built on making these hacks. And the point is that even though Mario's abilities and movesets aren't changing, the levels are offering enough variety and variance in terms of what they're testing the player that you can have these amazing games that are all still built from that same foundation. Now, with something like when I was watching the speedrun of Invictus, for instance, that would be an example one that the developer actually create brand new mechanics and systems to test the player on as well. And that one seems to be very popular along those lines. But getting back to the topic when it comes to the independent scene, I've seen a lot of these quote-unquote tofu games from either new or even established developers, where this idea just doesn't seem like it can last for hours of entertainment. And there's another major part about this when it comes to roguelike design. whether it is a pure roguelike or just any game built on procedural generation, where either the beginning or the end is too similar on each time that it hurts replayability. So, for example, when it comes to the beginning, this is where like the first 10 to 30 minutes of a roguelike, you're always doing the same thing. You're waiting for that first power-up. You're waiting to start getting those random elements that change how you play. But you're still repeating the same thing at the start, and that's going to start to wear on the player. The other side is if the ending is too similar, then it becomes a case of, unless I prepare for X, I'm going to lose every time. And we see this in games like FTL. Trying to think of some other ones quickly off the top of my head. Dead Cells would be an example of this. And even games that do offer multiple boss endings, such as Slay the Spire and the Binding of Isaac, can run into this, where if you're trying to do a specific thing, you must have your build set to counter that, or you will never win. And this was one of the things that we saw when I was trying to run the Delirium plays in the Binding of Isaac. Now, with that said, of course, the middle points for a lot of roguelike or roguelite-based designs is usually the best aspect of it. That's that sort of a muddy or a wibbly-wobbly center for a lot of these roguelike games where anything and everything can happen. You never know what items you're going to get. Your build is far enough along that you can start to fine-tune it or start to see that level of variance, and really adds a lot to the gameplay if the player can reach that point. But if your beginning is too similar each time, people are just going to get tired of it, of having to repeat that same basic pattern again and again. Another example is something that we see in a lot of strategy-based games, where the first 10 to 15 minutes, or even like the first 30 to 45 turns, all behave the same way. And I forget who I was talking to about this. I'm not sure if I was talking to... we were mentioning this on the Discord channel, that it's one of the reasons why a lot of people who fall in love with strategy games, it's basically about the learning curve, and then once they've learned and mastered the game, the title just goes away. I believe Tom Chick of Quarter 3 fame coined the Chick parabola back during the 1-Up era, or even before that, where he discussed that the more he learned a game, the less enjoyment he had while playing it. And that's always been a point about a lot of these kinds of games that just focus entirely on one gameplay loop. That once you've found all the tricks, once you know how to play to the point that it just becomes mechanical, there's nothing else for you to really do. And it's one of the reasons why the best roguelikes keep the player guessing from beginning to end. Again, it's why we have hundreds of hours in the Binding of Isaac, Enter the Gungeon, and so on, that you just never know how things are going to work out for you, so it keeps things varied. Again, Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld would be examples of that as well. Speaking of which, I think RimWorld is almost done its early access period, or maybe it came out of it now. Let me see. It will be out this week actually. Huh? That's good for them. But again, with this point that for a lot of these games, it becomes a matter of quantity instead of quality. And I think that's one of the things that I think for myself and a lot of older gamers that we've shifted away from. In the old days, it was nice to get a game that had 60 to 100 hours of content. Your JRPGs, city builders, and so on and along those lines. But eventually it just gets to the point of I'm doing the same thing again and again, and there's still 40 more hours until this game is over. And I guess for people watching this, either live or recorded, do you find yourself gravitating towards these very long experiences that are just the same thing, or do you prefer a shorter but more varied experience with your games these days? And this is, I think, another big reason why we're seeing more of this focus towards lifestyle games or games as a service model for a lot of the live titles that come out, Warframe, Payday 2, Destiny, and we can keep going down the line. With these titles, the ones that have succeeded and kept going have been the ones who have added in brand new gameplay and new options, as opposed to just saying, we're just going to keep updating the same map, or here's just 2 more maps that play the same way, we'll see you guys in 6 months. Again, I've been trying to get the Warframe developers on for some time, but they have really stuck the landing when it comes to a live service game, or a lifestyle game. They keep adding in brand new systems, they keep changing everything around, and it keeps the game fresh. And the best part is that the original version of Warframe, from what I heard from a lot of people, was not that good. It was very repetitive. And they could have just stuck with that and kept their fan base basically stable or declining. But they decided to keep growing it, and it changed that much. Payday 2, on the other hand, has kind of ran into that rut, I think. That they have this extensive lore and backstory they've built up. They have all these different characters and heists. But, again, there's only so many ways you can dress up the same kind of content. And I was talking to a friend about this with Payday 2, that one of the big things that when they started with the game was that they were planning on doing a lot more multi-day heists, having legitimately different heists all tied together in kind of a quasi-campaign. But the problem they ran into is because of their internet connection issues or their server problems, people kept dropping and they were losing all their progress. So instead of trying to make one heist be like 4 different heists in one, they went the route of let's just have 4 different heists. But again, there's only 2 ways of playing Payday 2: stealth and going loud. And there's just not much, there's only so much you can do with those simple mechanics. And that's kind of a major point when we discuss this, that at some point a game needs to end. There's only so much you can do if your entire gameplay loop is built on running and jumping, or isometric shooting, or even just roguelike hack and slash. And you need to understand that you can't get 100 hours out of every game design. Some games are only meant for like 2 to 5 hours, maybe even less than that. We of course see this with a lot of the art style games that aim for telling a unique story or expression, but maybe they're like 30 minutes to an hour long. Now, of course, with that said, though, that raises the even better debate about how do you price a game like this? Because, again, it's easy when we're talking about just pure hours. But as we all know, just because a game promotes 500 hours, 50 hours, or even 3 hours, that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get value out of all that. As another big point, I picked up our press key for Disgaea 5. And anyone who's played Disgaea knows that these games don't end. They can be played almost indefinitely. They're basically like the Twilight Zone of video games. And if you try to play all 5 of them, that's probably a good year or 2 of your life done trying to master those games. But depending upon your own interest level, a Disgaea game can last 10 to 30 hours if you're playing just as a straight SRPG. It could be 50 to 100 hours if you just want to do some min-maxing. It could be 400 to 1,000 hours if you're trying to go for everybody there. But it's just not feasible, I think, for a lot of people to play these games. And we've talked about this before, especially with something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, that games that take too long to get going is another big issue, but it's kind of beyond this topic for today. But there's not much I can really say about this by myself. So for people watching this recorded, let me know what you think. Because again, we see these kinds of like tofu games from a lot of independent developers. And I think the reason is that for many indie developers, you don't have a massive budget to try and make your everything game. And even then, as we've talked about, the everything game is kind of a myth. If you try to make a game that appeals to everybody, it's going to appeal to no one. And I think more people these days respect a game that does what it sets out to do, and then it has the courtesy to end. We don't need every game to be 60 hours long. And I think it's better if you have 5 hours of amazing gameplay that's unique and varied versus 50 hours that just repeats itself. And we were talking about this with somebody like Nintendo. I was talking to a friend that Nintendo is a great example of a developer that really gets mileage out of their game systems. Nobody I think I have ever heard complain that a main Mario game is too long. I don't think anyone has ever said, I wish Super Mario Odyssey was 30 hours less kind of game. Because Nintendo knows how to get the most value. Almost just bit my inside of my mouth there when I said that. They know how to get the most value out of all their game systems, and they know how to tweak and change things so that it's a different experience. So that while yes, you are still running, jumping, or throwing a Cappy around Super Mario Odyssey, but the circumstances and the mechanics surrounding that change based on the level. Maybe you're possessing a Goomba in one level. Maybe you're one of those birds with a really long beak that you like flip upside walls and stuff like that. But the point is that the core gameplay of Mario is enjoyable, and everything surrounding it is the icing on the cake. So that most people who finish a Nintendo game or a Mario game, they're either going to say to themselves, I got my money's worth, or I wish there was more. And if your game can get to that point, then you have a winner in my book.